हेलो एवरीवन, वेलकम बैक टू आवर यूट्यूब चैनल। और आज का जो हम टॉपिक कवर करेंगे वो है फेमिनिज्म। बिफोर दैट हमें पता है कि अनअकैडमी का जो यूपीएससी सीएसई सब्सक्रिप्शन है वो बहुत लिमिटेड पीरियड ऑफ टाइम के लिए है। उसके बाद जो है ये प्राइस बहुत बढ़ जाएगा। तो अगर आपको अभी इस पे डिस्काउंट चाहिए तो आप अभी ये सिंपल कोड यूज कर सकते हो और आपको 10% का डिस्काउंट मिलेगा। Unacademy Aspire is providing you with the free all India mock test for all civil service aspirants under UPSC CSE Prelims of 2020 of paper 1 JS, and it will be conducted on every 10th and 25th of every month. And we are also providing you with the exciting prizes scholarship for top 50 rank holders, and this was conducted on 10th October at 10 a.m. sharp. So you can enroll now for this. We have UPSC CSE complete batch preparation courses that was already started from 5th October 2020, and we have 3 batch courses. The first is in bilingual, in which the medium of instruction is in Hindi, English both. The second one is in Hindi completely, and the third one is in English. So in whichever language you are comfortable in, you can enroll for that batch course. So this one subscription has like unlimited benefits, like you can learn from your home, you have unlimited access to all courses, top educators, full syllabus coverage, double doubt clearing session, live test series, study material will be provided to you in form of PDF format. Answer writing sessions will be taken under our mentor and guidance. As we all know that this is also one-stop solution to our every problem under the complete UPSC CSE preparation, because we have structured batches with top educators, batches in Hindi, English, bilingual, late night as well as 2-year batches, 100% syllabus coverage, vast range of optionals, prelims test series with evaluation, main test series with evaluation. We have dedicated doubt clearing sessions also, daily current affair practice, essay and answer writing practice. Performance analysis will be provided to every student. Along with that, we will prepare you for interviews. So this is going to help you in the long term. If you subscribe now, you will get 10% off. You just need to apply this simple code and get 10% off. Unacademy Champions Conclave was provided with the power pack session with the toppers of UPSC CSE 2019, and this conclave was a must attend for every UPSC CSE aspirant, and it succeeded in the country's most coveted exam. With this free to attend conclave and dedicated a day to learn about the preparation journey of 2019 toppers and get some tips and tricks about the ones who cracked it. We had 14 iconic toppers, 10 educators, and 14 talks and discussion. And we are also providing you with a daily current affair test series that is completely free, and it will be given to you on daily 7:30, and will consist of 20 questions for 20 minutes along with your marks that will consist for 40 marks, and you will get a test analysis after completing your test. So if you really like our channel, then you can join on YouTube, Telegram and Facebook. So let's start. As we all know that the feminism basically stands with the concern about the status and the role of women in our society and their relation to the men. So basically फेमिनिज्म का जो मतलब है कि ये बोलना चाहते हैं कि जो women है उन्होंने काफ़ी ज़्यादा सफ़र करा है over the period of time, जो हमारी हिस्ट्री से हम देखते आए हैं, और वो अभी तक सफ़र कर रही है क्योंकि काफ़ी ज़्यादा इनजस्टिस हो रहा है उनके साथ, क्योंकि उनके सेक्स की वजह से। और उसके बाद उन्हें क्या चाहिए, वो चाहते हैं इफेक्टिव मेजर्स हो जिससे उनके सारी प्रॉब्लम्स को रीएड्रेसल हो और उन्हें जस्टिस में ताकि इंजस्टिस को रीएड्रेसल कर सके। अब इसका मतलब ये भी होता है कि एक वॉइस ऑफ प्रोटेस्ट होगा जो इंफीरियर स्टेटस है जो अकॉर्डेड टू विमेन है हमारी सोसाइटी में, क्योंकि वो एक प्रोडक्ट है पेट्रियार्की के लिए और वो रीजन पे बेस्ड नहीं है। जैसे कि हमें पता है कि विमेन को कंसिडर करते हैं कि वो इंफीरियर है एज कम्पेयर टू मेन, एंड मेन आर कंसिडर टू सुपीरियर. So if we also see that in the early feminism, we can see that emerged after the wake of Enlightenment, because the Enlightenment was a period when we started actually questioning each and everything, right from our customs to our practices to our understanding of things, science, technology and everything. And there were a lot of development that was taking side by side. So this also enlarged the scope for the rights of man, so as include to the equal rights to women also should be given. If we are giving rights to man, like to right to have property and all this, then we should also give rights to women also. So in Britain, the free thinking women like Mary Wollstonecraft and the Harriet Taylor made a fervent appeal to the equal rights of women in England. And we can later see that even the John Stuart Mill in his essay, The Subjection of Women in 1869, has also argued that women were by no means less talented than men, and therefore they deserve equal rights and status like the men. So in the contemporary world, we can also see the issues that are concerning to the status of women and can be understood in drawing a proper distinction between the sex and gender. So let's understand the concept of sex and gender before we can understand the problems of women. So it's very important for us to understand what do you mean by sex and gender. So if we see that with the onset, it's very necessary for us to understand the distinction between sex and gender, and we'll understand this in the sociological context. Because when we use the term sex, it just means the biological differences that are there, such as the reproductive function and the already secondary characteristics like body hair or breast development that women have, and men also have their own biological difference also. And when we talk about the term gender, it basically refers to the cultural ideas that actually construct images and expectations that need to be fulfilled by both the men and women. And the nature, as we know, has divided the human race between men and women, but the status and role in the society has been divided by our culture. So when we talk about the women as a fair sex or a weaker sex, we also invoke the etiquette of the ladies first, or our attention is not just confined to just biological fact, but we're also entered in a proper realm of culture where it's very difficult for every individual to understand the women as a sexually different person rather than just stereotyping them on basis of gender. See, if we see in the social sciences and the literary criticism, we can also see the gender term has been used to indicate all the difference in the social status of a man and women is there. So basically, they refer to the fact that women are placed as a lower status in relation to the men because they have a lower worth than men. So basically, this focuses on the gender perspective that actually calls for a cultural transformation of a proper society. And it also implies that the right that we're talking about, the status of women, is always in relation to the men in their social and cultural, that means the political sphere. So the cultural, as we all know, it basically means refers to certain distinctive features of different groups and their practices and cultural practice are very different, but the main theme or the concept is actually same everywhere. So we can also observe from the typical attitudes, if we talk about the gender, that can be found that throughout the civilized world. And we can also see that these attitudes tend to divide the male and female personality traits and behavioral into two opposite patterns, and they make a very clear distinction between them, that men should behave in this way and women should behave in this way. And these patterns are basically divided into what we actually call them as the masculine and the feminine. As we all know, the masculinity is basically associated with the aggressiveness, logical outlook, control of emotion express, attitude of dominance, whereas we categorize the femininity with the peacefulness, intuitiveness, emotional expressiveness, and submissiveness. So we have made two broad categories of both male and female, and we have actually put the whole population in the world in those two categories, and we expect them to perform their functions according to the roles that are assigned to them by the society. So we can also see certain variation in certain characteristics also, that is also possible in a very different social context. For example, we can take that a wife may be relatively submissive to her husband, but a mother, she may not be towards her children. So the degree of submission of a woman can also vary from case to case or from relation to relation, and the same concept or the same idea can be also put through males also. So if we talk in case of the relative dominance of a man and the relative submissiveness of a woman, we actually try to represent all the universal traits that are there, which are not just directly based on biological differences, but they're culturally admired by everyone, and they are expected to follow their roles according to what has been decided by our culture. And so therefore they have intermix and interchange the sex and gender into the same also. So we can also see that all these stereotypes and all these sort of or arguments that are made on this distinction that are there for gender about the masculinity and femininity are basically the products of the social organization that is always based on patriarchy and its institution. So the division of a labor, if you talk about in a family and a competitive net and exploitation, is always a characteristic of a capitalist system. So from this perspective, the concept of masculinity and the femininity, we can also see that this can also be served as an instrument of social control that basically reinforce the male dominance. And so if a female or a woman tends to behave in an authoritarian manner, she has always been particularly towards the men, then her behavior is termed to be very indecent. So these expectations are always like attached to differentiate the roles between males and females, and it serves as the foundation of gender inequality in our society. Let's talk about the natural inequality. So as we know that many thinkers in the past have talked about that the women are very inferior sex and they should actually stay in home. So they actually characterize the difference between the male and female, that is sex, as a natural inequality that women have. Let's talk about the let's talk about the Rousseau. So Rousseau, in his essay A Discourse on the Origin of Inequality in 1755, wrote that he distinguished between the natural inequality and the conventional inequality also. So natural inequality among according to him basically describes this as the inequality of age, health, beauty, physical and the intellect capacity of different people, which were created by the nature, and these inequalities were largely unalterable. And on the other hand, the conventional inequalities that basically represent disparities of wealth, prestige and power are different among all individuals. So these inequalities were also known as the product of our social arrangements. So we can undertake a critical examination of all these inequalities from a viewpoint of justice and can reduce them by altering our social arrangements. So we can also see the conventional inequalities were alterable, whereas the natural inequality was not alterable. So we can see while the division of a society was based on male and female, it actually represents the natural inequality. The gender inequalities are basically product of a convention and culture, and these inequalities can also be questioned and removed whenever they are found objectionable. Now let's talk about demanding equal rights. So as we know, in response to all the discrimination that has been done to women over a period of time, we can see that this was based on gender that has to become informed the feminist theory. And this gave rise to the feminism or the feminist political theory that basically implies the advocacy of equal rights of women and men that could be accompanied by the commitment to improve the position of women in the society. So it tries to seek the restoration of justice of women who actually remained deprived of equal status and opportunity that were given to men in the earlier period of time. So the condition in the present day society has often been reflected in a report according to the United Nations reports in 1918. They said that even though women constitute the half of the population, but they performed 2/3 of the work hours, that they receive only 1/10 of the world's income. So only one less than 100 of the world's property. So it is clearly visible that the women's unpaid work is not even counted in the economy, and they go for and they perform their duties without any break. So we can also see that women in the property are given less rights as compared to males, and this conditions also remains more or less prominent today also. So it has also been proved that beyond the doubt of the biological difference we can see between the male or female do not just justify the inferior status of women, but we can also see that there are cultural factors that has contributed to the accentuate the biological difference between men and women. So all the rapid improvement in the women's aesthetic records in the recent decades we can see is an indication that the social norms had shaped the biological and restricted women's physical development. So the feminist anthropologists have also clearly pointed out that there are some ethnic groups physical differentiation between men and women is not as prominent as in others. So the present status of women, we can also see, was the product of the social arrangements, and women often spend most of the time in the domestic work and in rearing children. So most women don't get an opportunity to develop their own personality. So therefore they are made to believe that the proper sphere of their activity is within their household, and they did not need to take the interest in public life. And from the beginning, the girls are often taught to pay more attention to their personal relations, not to their personal success. And the boys are often taught to be very firm, assertive, and aggressive. So girls are taught to be obedient, shy, and submissive, and boys are often encouraged to become doctors, engineers, and lawyers, and girls are encouraged to be school nurse, teachers, nurses, or secretary, because over here their position basically determines all the core values of giving or nurturing a particular individual. So the experience gained by the women in their own professional life does not help them to take up does not upheld them to take up a political career. So now let's talk about the questioning patriarchy. So we can see, in the light of the growing consciousness that is there against the various forms of injustice that is prevalent in our society, the position of women have often been regarded as a status of women that needs to be often reviewed, challenged, and changed. So indeed, the feminist theory and the movement that has been urged that the women's situation and the inequalities between men and women are often being treated as a central political issues also. So these streams of feminist thought can also focus on the causes and remedies of the women's inequalities and subordination or the oppression also. So, if the injustice against the women, we can see, has existed since the earliest period of time, then why has it has come out to be forefront in the recent times? So it was also recalled that the earlier stages of social organization, the biological differences between men and women were necessitated the division of labor between them. But men who were like physically strong and stable chose to go out for hunting or for doing other work, and women were constrained to undertake the childbearing, rearing that was close to remain at home and perform household job. So this system was based on a proper mutual care adjustment and did not believe in any significant level of resentment. But we can also see that with the development of technology and all the changes that took place in the many parts of the social organization, but the division of labor between men and women remained same, more or less unchanged. So with the evolution of the various form of power, we can see the man as a head of family was often regarded of the clan also, or a tribe, acquired more and more power as compared to women that were largely continued to hold the subordinate position in their household. So women were given some concessions and exemptions from the strenuous, arduous tasks, as they regarded as a weaker sex, and as they were sexually, as we can say, emotionally, were very vulnerable, and she was not even allowed to mix with the strangers. So the shyness was also like given to the women as a women's ornament, and she was encouraged to decorate herself in the beauty that was admired in the poetry, music, paintings, or other works of art. So in a civilized society, we can see that she was recognized as a fair sex and endowed with a special dignity. The manners of First Lady was also evolved from the confirm that dignity, and what was helping a damsel in distress was also admired as an act of chivalry among men. However, we can also see that in spite of giving so much importance to the women in the social life, she was systematically deprived of a share in power, and she was given security but not an opportunity to learn about certain things. So therefore, this made her very incompetent. This made her as competent as men, and therefore it vindicated them to claim for the equality in the rights. So in particular, we can also see that they were deprived of the right of ownership of property, vote, opportunities of education, higher learning, even though these deprivations had no logical connection with her biological status as women. So the early voices were basically demanding the rights of women were basically focused on all these questions. Now let's talk about the Mary Wollstonecraft idea. So as we know, the Mary Wollstonecraft idea was the first feminist who actually published her essay in the Vindication Rights of Women in 1792 as a response to the Rousseau's work. So women were not just restrained from voting, but they were also deemed to be very unfit for education and were often debarred from many occupations, and she had no legal right to own her own property also. So she had no real right to divorce even if her husband abused her. That's what Wollstonecraft said. So Wollstonecraft forcefully challenged the prevailing belief in female inferiority and demanded for equal rights for women. And she often argued that women, like men, can also are very rational individuals and they should have equal rights. And she established the principle on which the campaigns of women were the right of education, employment, property, and the right to vote were later built on. Even the John Stuart Mill, we can say, in his Subjection of Women in 1869, also tried to demonstrate that women were in no way inferior as compared to men in terms of their talents, and they pleaded to give them the full and legal political rights. Now, what are the outcomes of feminist movements? We can see that in the 19th century, the feminist theory basically focused on removing educational and professional barriers from women's life, but the reforming spirit behind this campaign was often a quite militant because which accompanied in the early 20th century for women's suffrage. And we can see in most recent, the demands of movement in the Western world basically are focused on the employment rights, equal pay, equality in social benefit, taxation, and so on. So in the contemporary world, we can see further with the advancement in technology, diversification of business, industry, administration, arts and professions, the increasing demand for the new skills and talent and professional competence have also given way to the women to basically about the opportunity for proving their abilities. And they have also been encouraged to acquire the higher qualification and training and to seek respectable careers. And it is now realized that women are basically fit to perform the most of the jobs that men do and for which they were not considered fit earlier. So basically now there were certain changes that were made in our society in terms of the political rights that they were given, but the equal rights was no longer questioned in the certain enlightened circle. So now, as we know that the broad streams of feminism are, the feminist theory has been divided into various schools of thought, and the three most important schools of thought are: first is the liberal feminism, radical feminism, and socialist feminism. So the liberal feminism, as we know, basically it aims at the revival of the convention, the feminist movement, and it insists on the absolute equality of opportunity for men and women in all the walks of life, and to complete the removal of the gender-based discrimination in our society. And its program basically includes the equal pay for women work, abortion laws reform, increasing the representation of women in parliaments, bureaucracy, and dignified profession, and etc. So this was also a proper popular stream in the feminist movement, but it is not considered to be very influential. Now let's talk about the radical feminism. So its the chief spokesman was the Firestone, and in her celebrated work in the dialectic, Sex basically argued that the women's subordination could not just be understood as a symptom or an aspect of some deeper or more comprehensive system of domination such as racism, caste-based division of society, but historically women constituted the first oppressed group and their subordination could not be eliminated by the various changes such as the elimination of prejudice and even the abolition of class society. So the Firestone basically claimed that on the basis of women's subordination was ultimately biological, and we can also understand the women the human reproductive biology was responsible for women considering as a weaker sex. We can also see the survival of women and their children basically required that infants should depend on lacting women and women in turn should be depend on men. So the happily the material condition were therefore ending, and this was inevitable dependence had finally been achieved in the 20th century. We can see with the advent of the reliable contraceptives and baby foods and the test tube babies. So these technological advancement basically provided women the means to free themselves from the tyranny of their reproductive biology and refusing the childbearing and the child-rearing role towards society as a whole, men as well as women. Even the Kate Millett in her Sexual Politics in 1971 argued that the relationship between the sexes was basically based on a power and further sustained by an ideology, and it was similar to the relation between the classes and race, and therefore it was treated as a political relationship. So this was based on our analysis of women's subordination in the Max Weber's theory of domination, as we all know. And Millett argued that men have exercised the domination of women in two forms, through their social authority and the economic force. And time had now come to smash these implements of men's domination. Even the Firestone and Kate Millett are often regarded as the two main pillars of radical feminism who try to exercised the enormous influence in developing the women's liberation movement in 1970s. Now let's talk about the socialist feminism. So the socialist feminism basically stream in the feminism that represents a combination of patriarchal analysis of the radical feminism and class analysis of Marxism. It implies that the capitalists as well as men are basically beneficiary of the women's subordination, and the socialist feminism have particularly developed and a particular analysis of labor, of both the wage labor and the domestic labor. So they have also like considered the role of culture and the psychoanalytical aspect of sexuality also. So the Sheila was a chief representative of the school that advocated a participatory decentralized approach to change the to bring a social change that contemplates the linking the struggle of all the oppressed groups. So, in her best historical writings in the Women Resistance Revolution in 1972 and The Hidden from History in 1973, tried to reclaim the past of women as a source of knowledge and strengthen that they could contribute in the present struggle. So, she also like continued this approach in the past as before us. As a Marxist, she tried to maintain the struggle of women's liberation is very essential to bound with the struggle that was there against capitalism. She has also shown from the historical evidence that the class exploitation and women's operation are basically closely linked like a phenomena. And along with that, she has also like argued that the success in this spheres can only be achieved through combining all these struggles. Now let's talk about the empowerment of women. As we know, a general awareness of exploitation of women are shown on the various fronts like the social, culture, political, economic front. But they also led to the strong protest also that manifested in the women's liberation movement and which emerged in the United States, as we know, in the early 1970s. We can also see that this movement also spread to Europe and other parts of the world. The movement basically focused on equal rights, status of women in male-dominated society, and some were basically prominent organization that was associated with the movement that were there. And some of these organizations are like the National Organization of Women, Boston's Bread and Roses, Women's Radical Action Group, Women's Equity League, and etc. were there. So women liberation movement basically demanded a truly equal treatment of men and women, and it required that many in the society's myths and values belief that was concerning to the status and role of women in society should be fundamentally reassessed and changed also. So these changes were also embraced in the patterns of works like families and the social behavior, decision making, politics, religion, and education. So even the more personal and private domain of sexuality was also needed to be redefined over here. And these demands led to the widespread of the diverse issues that were concerning to women. So these include a proper daycare facilities for children and the development of a sexist vocabulary that was there for the chairman that was replaced by the chairperson. So this representation of women and their roles were there in the mass media that was including the proper advertisement. And so all these debates have not just led to the enactment of the new laws in some countries, but also the worldwide acceptance of the new norms that are protecting the dignity of a woman. So now let's talk about the India's implementation. We can see in India that some of the important legislation concerning like the protection of women have been taken, like the Immoral Traffic Prevention Act, Dowry Prohibition Act, Indecent Representation of Women, Commission of Sati Prevention Act. Female feticide was sought to be uh, prevented by the enactment of the prenatal diagnostic techniques for the regulation and the prevention of the misuse of Act in 1994. The recent legislation that was also concerning to the empowerment of the women that includes in Hindu Succession Act in 2005, and the protection of women under the Domestic Violence Act was also there. So the feminists also try to assert that until the condition of equal participation of women was not there in the public life is fulfilled, the concept of citizenship cannot be also brought in the logical conclusion. So in India, a beginning of this direction has been made by making reservation of 1/3 of women in the seats of panchayat for women, and this will also encourage women to join in politics at the grassroots level, and by their representation it will increase to 1.5, and the provisions can also be made for the adequate representation in the legislative assemblies and parliament. So the opening up of the vast opportunities of the higher education would also prove a very instrumental to their larger representation in the administration and high profile professions. So in this way, the idea of equal citizenship can also be fully realized from a feminist point of view. And feminists argue that even after getting full citizenship in law, women can continue to suffer from subjection of women in social life. So from 1960s to 70s, the status of women in society and politics has been the main center of attention. So earlier we can also see usually that it was thought that after proper establishing a legal equality between men and women, the women were not just left with any issue of complaint, but after the extension of the right to vote, for women, there were also some studies on voting behavior, and it was found out that women's participation in voting was much lower as compared to men. So to explain this situation, it was always argued that the women were largely interested in private and domestic affairs, and they were less interested in politics and public affairs, and they had no time to attend to all these matters. So now let's conclude I'll conclude my presentation. Basically, there are two broad views that are concerning to the equal rights for women. One view is that there is no difference between men and women, that are regard their capabilities, and hence they are governed by the same laws. And second, it views that the women are basically essentially different from women due to the biological, cultural and socially, and they should be given equal opportunities in order to develop, apply their distinctive capabilities along with the equal rights. Therefore, women were also exempted from the arduous tasks like underground mining, working in night shift. Similarly, women should also be entitled to maternity leave that were relating to the benefits, arrangement of maintenance and custody of children after divorce. Besides, in order to compensate the women for underrepresentation is also like important position. Reservation for women should also be made in the seats in the higher learning appointments and the seats in legislatures and etc. And they should also be given proper tax concessions in order to encourage them to work for the additional income. And therefore, this seems to be very reasonable and quite widely endorsed in today.